March 17, 1943. Tirpitz Ufer 76-78, Berlin. The folder slammed onto the mahogany desk with such force that coffee splashed from Admiral Wilhelm Canaris's porcelain cup, staining intelligence reports that would have meant execution if discovered by the Gestapo. "Impossible," he whispered, the single word hanging in the air like smoke. "The Americans are feeding us propaganda through turned agents." Through the tall windows of Abwehr headquarters, Canaris could see the Landwehr Canal, a waterway that had swallowed secrets and bodies for decades. But the secret in his trembling hands was different. Now, as chief of German military intelligence, he held a report that didn't just challenge Nazi propaganda, but the entire mathematical foundation of a German victory. It was a single, terrifying number from the heart of America, a number so absurd, so world-altering, that to believe it was to accept that Germany had already lost. The report itself was thin, a few pages of cables and transcribed conversations gathered by agents in Mexico City. But the numbers it contained were heavier than any Panzer division. They described an industrial miracle that bordered on fiction. According to the intelligence, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant was producing one 4-engine B-24 Liberator bomber every single hour. Let that sink in. The B-24 Liberator wasn't a simple machine. It was an 18-ton behemoth of aerial warfare, built from 1.5 million individual parts, held together by 450,000 rivets. 30,000 separate components, all converging with watchmaker precision. Yet, this single American factory was rolling one of these complex, city-leveling aircraft off its assembly line faster than Germany could produce a simple Kübelwagen military vehicle. For the men in Berlin, this wasn't just a production statistic. It was a mathematical equation for total annihilation. A number so large, so profound in its implications, that it simply could not be real. It had to be a lie. But this wasn't simple denial. It was a core belief, an article of faith preached from the very top of the Third Reich. For years, Nazi propaganda had portrayed America not as an industrial giant, but as a corrupt, inefficient nation of consumers, incapable of true military discipline or production. Luftwaffe chief Hermann Goering had literally laughed at initial reports of American aircraft production, famously declaring that Americans could only build refrigerators and razor blades, not sophisticated warplanes. This contempt was a cornerstone of their worldview, a belief system repeated by Hitler himself. He insisted that America's democracy made it weak, its diverse, mongrel population made it inefficient, and its Jewish influence made it corrupt. Therefore, any intelligence suggesting otherwise, no matter how well-sourced, wasn't just treated as false. It was considered an ideological impossibility. This was the wall of delusion against which Admiral Canaris's terrifying facts were about to smash. The first cracks in that wall appeared not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the hazy, tequila-fueled atmosphere of a diplomatic reception in Mexico City. The intelligence came through a network run by George Nikolaus, who cultivated sources among American businessmen traveling between Detroit's factories and Mexico's oil fields. On February 3, 1943, an American oil executive named Harold Morrison attended one such reception. In his audience was Wolfgang Blau, a German Abwehr agent posing as an Argentine leather merchant, memorizing every alcohol-loosened word. After several tequilas, Morrison began describing a recent tour of the Willow Run facility, a spectacle arranged by Ford to dazzle investors. "Gentlemen," he said, "what I saw defies description." He spoke of an assembly line over a mile long, a building so vast that clouds formed near the ceiling, sometimes even causing it to rain inside the factory itself. Morrison then grabbed a pencil and began sketching on a cocktail napkin, a crude drawing that would soon become one of the most terrifying documents in the Third Reich. He drew 2 bomb bays, each holding 4,000 pounds of ordnance, and 4 massive engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower. Blau, the fake leather merchant, just nodded along, a picture of casual interest. But this conversation wasn't just data. It was a first-hand, eyewitness account of a production miracle that German high command was certain could not exist. While the napkin sketch from Mexico City was compelling, it was still just a rumor from a bar. The second source was far more concrete, coming through Francisco Franco's Spain, a friendly neutral power secretly providing intelligence to Germany. The source was Colonel José Ungria, the Spanish military attaché in Washington. In March 1943, Ungria attended a reception at the Argentine embassy where he met the architect of Willow Run himself, Ford's production chief, Charles Sorensen. Believing he was speaking to a potential post-war customer, Sorensen spoke with unguarded pride about his achievement. He contrasted Ford's methods with the original manufacturer, Consolidated Aircraft, who built B-24s outdoors, taking 180,000 man-hours for each one. Sorensen explained his revolutionary vision, moving the aircraft past stationary revolutionary workers, not the other way around. He proudly told the Spanish colonel that every word he spoke would be in a coded cable to Berlin within 2 weeks. Ungria listened intently as Sorensen boasted, unknowingly providing the Abwehr with a second, high-level, and devastatingly detailed confirmation of the impossible truth. What Sorensen revealed to the Spanish colonel was the secret to the miracle, a complete rejection of traditional aircraft manufacturing. He explained that when he first visited the consolidated plant in San Diego, he saw workers swarming over stationary aircraft, building each one like a custom prototype. "I knew we could do better," Sorensen had said. His solution was born in a single night of intense inspiration in a San Diego hotel room, where he sketched out the entire production flow. The core principle was revolutionary. You don't build a bomber by having workers run to the plane. You build it like a Model T by moving the plane past the workers. Sorensen broke the B-24 down into 60,000 separate operations. The bomber was assembled in massive sections, fuselages from one direction, wing assemblies from another, that converged like rivers flowing into a sea. Each worker performed just one or two simple, repeatable tasks, achieving perfection through repetition. A woman who yesterday was making breakfast for her children now installed hydraulic lines in the tail section. They could be trained in days, not months. This was the genius of Willow Run. It wasn't just a factory. It was a system that turned complexity into simplicity and ordinary people into master builders. Sorensen's system didn't just revolutionize manufacturing. It revolutionized the manufacturer. To the Nazis, a factory's strength came from disciplined Aryan men. But Willow Run was powered by the very people their ideology dismissed as weak and inferior. The plant employed 42,331 workers at its peak. Of those, over a quarter were women, the famous Rosie the Riveters. Sorensen himself noted they were often better at detailed work, with smaller hands for tight spaces and more patience for repetitive tasks. Nearly 4,000 African Americans operated sophisticated machinery, and 1,200 disabled workers managed critical logistics. This was the workforce that defied every tenet of Nazi racial theory. A coalition of women, black citizens, and boys of 16 were building the most complex machine in the world. While Berlin preached about the purity of the master race, this diverse, mongrel army of civilians was outproducing them by an order of magnitude. For German intelligence, this wasn't just an industrial problem. It was a complete ideological demolition. The reports from Mexico and Washington were not isolated anomalies. Soon, a torrent of corroborating intelligence began flowing into Berlin from every corner of the globe. German intelligence received consistent reports through Swedish, Argentine, Japanese, and Turkish channels, all telling the same impossible story. With no other options left, he had to confront the second most powerful man in Germany. He spread his evidence across Goering's massive oak table, photographs, intercepted documents, and summaries from 17 sources, laying them out like a dealer showing cards that would lose the game. Goering, weighing over 280 pounds by this point in the war, picked up a photograph showing the mile-long assembly line with contempt. "Canaris," he sneered, "do you take me for a fool? These are obviously wooden mock-ups, props for propaganda. The Americans want us to believe they can build aircraft like sausages." Canaris countered with an intercepted railroad manifest, showing the plant consumed 16 million pounds of aluminum monthly, more than Germany's entire national production. Goering just laughed harshly. "And where do they get this aluminum? From their Negro workers? From their women riveters?" He tossed the report back onto the table. "Canaris, you've been deceived by American propaganda." In the lavish halls of Carenhall, the truth was rejected not with evidence, but with pure, blind arrogance. A week after the disaster at Carenhall, Canaris was summoned to the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia for the final judgment. He stood before Adolf Hitler, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, and Generals Jodl and Keitel. While Hitler studied maps for the upcoming Battle of Kursk, Canaris, knowing he was risking his life, presented the intelligence one last time. He stated the numbers plainly. If the Americans were producing 1,400 B-24s monthly, plus thousands of other bombers and fighters, the aerial bombardment of the Reich would soon become unstoppable. Hitler listened with visible impatience before cutting him off. "A bomber," he lectured, "is not a car. It requires a precision and dedication that he believed Americans did not possess. It's impossible," he declared, scoffing at the idea they could achieve in 16 months what took Germany 6 years to prepare for. General Jodl, studying the figures, began to make a calculation. "Even if we accept 1/4 of these figures as accurate, the figures are false," Hitler interrupted, his voice sharp and absolute. In the Führer's bunker, reality was not a matter of evidence, but a matter of will. The truth was officially dead. After the judgment from the Führer, the reports were useless. But Canaris had one last, secret piece of evidence, obtained through contacts in Switzerland and smuggled into Germany via a Spanish diplomatic pouch. 5 minutes of film footage from inside Willow Run. In a locked room in Abwehr headquarters, he and his deputy, Colonel Hans Oster, watched it in silence. There it was, not a report, but reality. The camera traveled the entire mile-long assembly line, showing B-24s in every stage of construction. Men, women, black, white, all working with a steady, relentless precision. A clock, visible in several shots, confirmed the timing. It was all real. "My God," Oster whispered. "It's true." Canaris said nothing. He simply took out his cigarette lighter, lit the edge of the celluloid, and watched the undeniable truth burn into a pile of ash. He knew that if he showed the film to Hitler or Goering, they wouldn't be convinced. They would simply accuse him of creating it himself. An act of treason. He possessed the ultimate proof, and his only choice was to destroy it. The reality that was denied in Berlin's bunkers would soon deliver its own verdict in steel and fire. By February 1944, the storm broke. During Big Week, the American 8th Air Force sent over 1,000 heavy bombers to attack German aircraft factories. In 6 days, they dropped more bomb tonnage than the Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the entire Blitz. Fighter ace Adolf Galland desperately told Goering, "I've counted over 800 bombers in a single formation. These planes are real and they're dropping real bombs." The final judgment came on June 6, 1944. As the D-Day invasion began, over 11,000 Allied aircraft filled the skies over France. The once mighty Luftwaffe could muster fewer than 300 fighters to oppose them. A desperate message was sent to Berlin from the front lines. The enemy's aerial superiority is absolute. Our intelligence was correct. We were deceived not by the Americans, but by ourselves. Canaris's prophecy, whispered in the wolf's lair a year earlier, had been fulfilled in the most catastrophic way imaginable. When the war was over and the records were unsealed, the final accounting proved that Canaris's most terrifying reports had actually been conservative. The Willow Run plant alone produced 8,685 B-24 Liberators between 1942 and 1945. The peak production rate of one bomber every 63 minutes was sustained for months. In total, America produced over 300,000 aircraft during the war. Germany, by contrast, produced around 94,000. The final verdict of history was written in these numbers. While fighting a two-ocean war against two separate empires, the United States had produced 3.2 times more aircraft than the Third Reich. These weren't estimates or propaganda. This was the final, cold, mathematical truth. The German intelligence officers hadn't been wrong. They had just been the first to read the results. After the war, during the Nuremberg trials, Allied interrogators were faced with a confounding question. Why had the German leadership refused to believe the intelligence? The answer, provided by the very men who had presided over the failure, was more terrifying than a simple miscalculation. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, was asked directly why Germany didn't believe the numbers. His response was chillingly honest. He explained that to accept that Ford could produce a bomber every hour was to accept that their entire worldview was wrong. It meant accepting that democracy wasn't weak but strong, that racial mixing didn't create weakness but strength, and that they had started a war they could never win. Who, he asked, would tell Hitler that? Surviving intelligence officers confirmed this. Walter Schellenberg testified that every professional officer understood the numbers were accurate by early 1943. But in the Third Reich, the system punished unwelcome truths. To report the reality of American production was to risk execution for defeatism. The tragedy was not that they lacked intelligence. They were drowning in it. The failure was a leadership that preferred a comfortable, ideologically pure lie over a terrifying, worldview-shattering truth. The men who tried to warn the Reich paid the ultimate price for their foresight. In February 1944, as the Allied bombers began to prove his intelligence correct, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was removed from his position, suspected of defeatism and treason. His fate, and that of his deputy, was sealed. On April 9, 1945, with the sound of Allied artillery booming in the distance, both Admiral Canaris and Colonel Hans Oster were executed at Flossenburg concentration camp. They were killed just weeks before Germany's final surrender. Their crime was not treason, but telling a truth their leaders refused to hear, solidifying their status as the final victims of a regime destroyed by its own delusions. In the smoldering ruins of Berlin in May 1945, American intelligence officers made a final, haunting discovery. Buried in the rubble was a German intelligence report on Willow Run, Run, dated April 20th, 1945, Hitler's last birthday. It was a final, internal postmortem, an epitaph written from within the heart of the dying Reich. After confirming the production numbers one last time, the anonymous author wrote, "We reported this truth 2 years ago. We were not believed. Germany dies not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of wisdom to believe intelligence that contradicts what we wish to be true. Mathematics does not yield to mythology. Truth ignored becomes tragedy." The report was never delivered. By then, Hitler was in his bunker, counting down his final days as the thousands of American bombers that Canaris had warned him about delivered the final, unignorable argument from above. In the end, the story of Willow Run is more than a story about bombers. It is a timeless lesson about a simple, unbreakable equation. Reality does not bend to ideology. Mathematics does not yield to mythology, and the truth, when ignored, eventually becomes tragedy. The German spies did their job. They gathered the intelligence, they counted the bombers, and they reported the terrifying truth. But a fact is only powerful if it is believed. Willow Run built more than just aircraft. It built proof that democracy could be strong, that diversity could be efficient, and that a free people could achieve the impossible. The Third Reich was not just defeated by an enemy army. It was defeated by an industrial miracle it refused to believe in. It was killed as surely by its own ideological blindness as it was by any bomb.